Okay, for this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Amy Westcott. Amy is a juvenile idiopathic arthritis patient, sufferer, whichever way you want to word it, depending on the given day, I suppose. But is also a sort of community member of the Joel vs. Arthritis community and Twitch channel. She's training as an occupational therapist, and delighted to have her on the show tonight to talk about all things JIA, what steered her into that sort of career choice, the challenges, and also some of the wonderful stuff she's doing to raise awareness to make sure other people don't have the experiences that some of us, did when we were younger. So, Amy, welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited.
And I appreciate it's probably a totally different experience being this side of the camera compared to being in chat. So thank you, I do appreciate it.
No, you're welcome. It is very weird. I'm like, oh, but your face is usually there, but that's fine.
I'm used to just dealing with people's user handles as well. So yes, it's nice to put a face to the name.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you. The usual place where we start these things. Do you want to just, for those that don't know, you aren't familiar, just want to give us a bit of a background? If we just focus on, you as a person and who you are, where you're from, etc. And then your sort of arthritis journey, diagnosis, that sort of thing. And feel free to go into as much or as little depth as you want on that. Okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I'm Amy. I'm 31 years old. As Joel said, I'm currently training to be an OT. I'm in my first year of the MSc program at the University of Worcester, which is very exciting. I was diagnosed with JIA when I was 4 years old, so quite a while ago now. I've been through a bit, but at the moment I haven't been on medication for about 10 years now. Touch wood, haven't had any flare-ups. But I've kind of been through the whole journey through like JA at school, at university, at college. I've been through that journey, and then obviously kind of out the other side, working, looking for jobs, things like that. I've done a fair bit of different roles as well since graduating. When I did my first degree, I did quite a bit of traveling as well. I lived and worked in New Zealand for 2 years, and then in Australia for 1 year. And then there was a pandemic, and so I had to come back, which was the time where I thought, okay, now I should probably try and sort my life out a little bit. And I've always wanted to do occupational therapy. It's always been at the back of my mind of something that I was interested in and wanted to get into. I just kind of never had the right time. But throughout the pandemic, I was like, no, now is the time. If not now, then when? And it just so happened that the University of Worcester was doing an MSc course, and that's where I did my undergrad. So I was quite happy to go back to the same university again, which made it easier. That's kind of me in a very quick nutshell.
Thank you for sharing. I know that things are never easy. I still struggle with it myself.
No.
That was brilliant. Thank you. I suppose I'm running the risk of jumping around here on the timeline, but I think anyone who's listening to this, particularly back on the podcast, the first thing that's going to jump up out there is the 10 years without treatment. I feel like I have to ask more about that in terms of like how that came about, and I suppose what is your secret, because to go that long, it's just that's so nice to hear some good news stories.
Yeah, it took a few times, because obviously with JIA they do say that there's that kind of chance that you could kind of grow out of it, or at least have less flares and less kind of issues going forward. So it took me a good few times to kind of get off my medication. So the way they did it was, I think it took about 3 different attempts. The first attempt, I came off my methotrexate. I was on methotrexate all my life. That's the only medication I've been on apart from steroids. But methotrexate was the only kind of thing around back in my day when I was first diagnosed. It was really only if you didn't do well with methotrexate, then there wasn't too much out there to help. Whereas nowadays, there's so many more different options in terms of medications and treatments. But yeah, so I came off medication, I think maybe the first time when I was about maybe 14 or 15. Didn't go well, had a massive flare, steroids, back on the methotrexate. A couple of years later, same thing again, off the methotrexate, massive flare up, all the steroid injections, and my arthritis is in every single joint as well. So steroid injections everywhere. I think it was like 32 joints. I think I had my steroid injections, so it was pretty intense when I did have steroid injections. And then the third time, which was just before as I was starting university, I think for the first time, and yeah, came off my medication and then haven't been on it since. So luckily, it kind of, whilst I still have kind of quite a lot of joint damage and limitations in terms of like my joints, so I can't bend my wrists all the way back, I can't touch my shoulders, I can't really kneel properly, so I've still got limitations and joint damage, but apart from that, I haven't had a flare for a good few years, which is great. I do have like if I do like a long hike or I'm walking or on my feet for all day kind of thing, I do get like quite achy ankles and things like that, but I think that's fairly common. So yeah, so luckily I haven't had any flare-ups for a good while.
That's amazing, and also thank you for having a positive, because obviously we do talk about the challenges a lot on this show, and it's nice to have a good news one, and it's just funny hearing those patterns, because so many guests have come on, and it was my experience as well, where when you're diagnosed in childhood, you're sort of told that there's this potentially sort of like game changing future where you grow out of it or whatever, and a lot of us seems to have had our first big remission. So mine was about 17, 18, 19, and I know Saruthi, when she's joined us on the show, has said similar things, that sort of period where you get a bit of a break and then it unfortunately comes back with a bang. So you are the first person I've met where that hasn't happened in that sort of teenage window. So
wow.
Yeah, that's great. And do you find people, in my experience anyway, they sometimes confuse that sort of previous damage limitation with flares? Because I can't turn my wrists over, and the amount of times people will say, "I'm sorry, you're having a flare." Like, no, I'm not having a flare. It's what you're left with, isn't it? And people,
yeah, it's just the way it is. It's just the way my joints are. That's how they've always been. So that's just the way I work. That's just the way I do things. And I was actually having a chat to my friend today, and I was talking about like doing this and talking about talking about the whole JIA journey kind of thing. And she was like, well, yeah, I've noticed how you do things differently, the way you like use your hands and you even holding your phone. She's like, you hold your phone and scroll through your phone differently to what I would do. And I was like, oh God, I've never even thought about that. Like, I guess because my wrist doesn't bend all the way back, so I kind of hold my phone in a certain position where it's easier. Instead of scrolling with my thumb, I scroll like with my whole hand, which I've never really noticed before. I never really thought about until today, and I was like, oh God, that probably is because of the way my joints are. And even even using a knife and fork, I think I probably still do that differently. The way I hold my knife and fork is different, and the way I get up if I'm sat off the floor, I use my knuckles, so I lean on my knuckles instead of putting my wrist down.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, which is very, very common. You can tell that with the JIA kids. So I think you just get used to, and because I was diagnosed when I was 4 years old, that I've not known life without arthritis. So this is just the way my body adapted and managed to kind of get me through what I needed to do. So yeah, I just do things a little bit differently, but that's fine.
And everyone adapts, and I think, but it is an area that's often overlooked with JIA because it's doing it in that formative years, and you're building up. So I try to explain to people, like, there's a bigger evolution with JIA, or there tends to be, to like somebody say who's middle aged and gets RA or something, because the way it's always been explained to me is it can evolve until your mid 40s typically, and I don't think they fully understand why that is, but it adds so many more layers, doesn't it? Again, at that age, because like you say, you're adapted, but you're not knowing that you're doing anything any differently because it's happening at such a young age.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the way it is. And I said before, you'd never known any differently. And it's only when people point it out and you're like, oh, yeah, okay, maybe that is why I've do things that way. Or, yeah, it is really interesting.
And I think we could probably be better with our language as well, because like the amount of times I've sort of slipped into talking about everything as a flare, and it might be like historical damage or a build up of previous issues and surgeries and things like that, but you sort of tend to fall into these traps, don't you, talking about anything related to a spike in your condition as being a flare. So I try to remind myself as well, when people just bundle everything under that label, that it's probably I'm not helping that as well.
It's not necessarily going to be a flare. It might just be that's just the way you do it, or that's just the way, if you're walking, or it might just be because your body's reacting to like I said before, if you're on your feet all day, or done a long hike or done a big load of exercise, then you are going to your body is going to be suffering a little bit. So it's just the way that is. But I never kind of let any of that stop me, especially growing up. I was very kind of stubborn in terms of not letting it kind of get in the way. I was very determined to kind of do the things I wanted to do. So when I was younger, I used to play hockey. I used to do a lot of kind of sports. I wanted to do all those things. And I remember my parents just being really, especially my mum, just being so concerned about me playing hockey. It's like, oh my gosh, what if you hurt your ankle? What if you, and I was just like, well, just do with it. Like, I want to do it, so I'm going to do it. And my parents were great in terms of just letting me kind of roll with that as well. Because I think, as parents, I mean, obviously I'm not a parent myself, but I can imagine letting your child kind of run off when they've got, certain problems, and do all these kind of scary things. Not that necessarily playing hockey is scary, but probably was for them, for me to be doing that. It's a really big thing for them to let me do that. So for them to not kind of put too many barriers in front of me is really, really really helped me in terms of just kind of getting on with it and just dealing with it, and just making me more determined to just do the things I wanted to do.
And I think that determination, and some people have used the word stubborn quite regularly with me. I think it's the same as you carry it on into later life as well. And I think it's just because of JIA, the time you have it, you have a wall put in front of you, but at that age you just navigate it and find a way over it, don't you? And it definitely has. I think I get a lot of, put it this way, where I'm trying to go with this, I get a lot of parents message me really worried when their kids get that diagnosis, and that's like always the number one thing I tell them as a positive. So I don't know if you've got any sort of similar thing for that.
Yeah, definitely. So I volunteer with the Children's Arthritis charity, CCAA. So me and my parents have volunteered with them for years, as well as my sister, actually. We first went along to one of those weekends when I was like a child, and we went along to a weekend where they bring loads of kids with arthritis together, loads of families, and parents can talk to each other. Kids can meet other kids with arthritis. And the first one I went to was probably 20 odd years ago. And then after that, my parents started volunteering. And then when I was old enough, I started volunteering. I was on the committee as well for a little bit. But so I've seen a lot of parents kind of attend these weekends and be obviously they're going to be worried and concerned about their child, but I think it's really good for them to see people who've been through it and kind of come out the other side and have that reassurance that they will be okay. And I think that is such a massive thing. And I think as well, it's a massive thing for kids to see other people like with arthritis and to have that representation. Because I didn't really know anyone really that was older than me. I met a couple of people obviously through the weekend and was friends with them. But before that, you don't really see people who've got arthritis, especially at a young age. It's so well, it's that age old thing, isn't it? Everyone thinks, oh well, it's for old people.
Yeah.
Why would young people have it? But I think it's so reassuring for other children to see someone like them.
Yeah. And it's isolating by its nature, especially when you're sort of laid up or you're spending long spells in hospital and this sort of thing. And but you know, even myself, there was another child in my hometown with arthritis, and we still didn't, because we just didn't know how to talk about it, or we didn't understand it. And so even when there might be somebody on your doorstep, that doesn't mean it's necessarily easy as well. So I think you're spot on. It really does help, because I think if I saw other people, because my experience, I've talked about it a lot on here, so for the regulars will be bored of hearing this, but it's just that, you know, you chucked in a waiting room with people that are maybe 50, 60 years ahead of you, and it's kind of end game, and that's the last thing as a kid you want to see. So I think just seeing, I don't know, 16-year-olds doing well with it or whatever would have been, or like your perfect example, somebody who's, you know, gone through that and all the challenges that brings with school and everything else, and is now doing brilliantly, then you know, that can only be a positive thing, can't it?
But yeah, as well. And I think even being able to see someone who's not doing as well and not still having kind of flare-ups and major kind of issues with their day-to-day, that's still representation that kids need. And that's still to be able to see someone be like, oh yeah, I have some of those struggles, oh I have been through that, or I've been through something similar. I think it's so important, just that awareness. But yeah, I was very lucky in terms of my hospital appointments as I was growing up, because I was based at Birmingham Children's Hospital, and they, you know, have a brilliant, incredible team there. But then when I moved on to adult services, I think I only went to a couple of appointments, and I was obviously the youngest person who was there. It was all these older people, and it was just me. And you can see them you see them like looking at you, don't you? Thinking, what are you doing here? You're not here. You're not, you know, allowed here. What's going on? But and I think that's probably a big reason why I kind of slipped. I think I kind of slipped out the system a little bit. So I missed a couple of appointments, maybe I missed one appointment, because I was at that age where, you know, I just finished. Oh no, I was just going into uni or at college, and I was kind of like trying to take control of my arthritis a little bit and going to appointments on my own. But because I was in an adult service, they're obviously a bit more strict in terms of letting you what they'll let you get away with. So if I didn't turn up to an appointment, and then it was like, oh, you're discharged now. Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I haven't been under a rheumatologist since then, which I should be. And I tried to get re-referred before I went traveling, but that didn't end up happening. So then now it's on my to-do list that I will do that, because I just feel like I need to have a bit of a checkup, and just to make sure everything's okay, especially because I know I've got joint damage. So just to have that, be back under a rheumatologist to kind of have that checkup just to see. But yeah, that's on my to-do list. But I think that is probably a big reason why I did kind of slip out the system, because I was like, oh, well, I'm fine. I'm not on medication. I was a teenager. So I was like, oh, no, don't need to go to this. And then it's so easily you're so easily kind of dropped, I think.
Yeah. And firstly, expect now everybody that knows you in chat on the channel to be asking you if you've done that every couple of weeks as a reminder to see if you get your food.
I know, yeah. I need that, to be fair, because I do keep forgetting. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll ring the doctors, and I'm like, no.
But what I would say, anyone who's listening to this back, that was really common before the pandemic. So I hate to think what it's like now, because those of us that are in the system, like, you know, I've made it quite public about my waiting 700 days for my next appointment, and I'm supposed to be seen every 6 months. But that happened to me. I went to university, and like I say, had my first big remission. I missed one appointment because, you know, I was at university and my whole world changed, and things were far more interesting than heading back to Norwich for a rheumatology appointment, and I was kicked out, and I had the same, and I still got the same doctor that I had since I was 12, and I then had to go back through the front door and get re-referred and everything, and that was crazy because at the time I was on methotrexate, and my view is if anyone's on something toxic like that or biologics, or you shouldn't be allowed to just drop out of the system just from a safety point of view. So anyone listening to this back, get your routine appointments, even if you're perfectly well, because as Amy says, not everything is about pain. You could be like my wrists. I've never had any pain in my wrists, but over the course of 5 years I somehow lost the ability to turn them over. It was only when I started drop and change, when a cashier would hand me money at the till, that I realised I couldn't put them flat, and that just crept up on me out of nowhere, and I never reported it because it didn't hurt. So like you say, just having that MOT isn't a bad thing, is it?
No, not at all. And yeah, it is on my to-do list, so you guys can kind of keep me in check and ask me if I've done it yet.
Obviously in our usual supportive way, but
yeah, exactly.
But yeah, cheers for sharing all that. And obviously I want to just, like I say, I appreciate I might be jumping around a little bit, but I'm just trying to pick out things that I think our listeners would ask about. So you mentioned that you're now sort of studying to be an OT. I'm assuming that's linked because of your experience with a long-term health condition in some way.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I had an incredible team at Birmingham Children's Hospital. They were all the staff were incredible, the nurses, OTs, physios, doctors. But I just remember the OT and physio in particular, just it all kind of made sense when they spoke to me, and it all kind of clicked. And I just remember when I was like really struggling and kind of going through some flares, I would really struggle putting my socks on. And it's such a simple thing, isn't it? Being able to put socks on, but I just couldn't bend down to put my socks on. It was just painful. I couldn't reach. So my sister, who's 2 years younger than me, bless her, but she would help me put my socks on in the morning before school. And then I remember seeing an OT, and then they gave me this like device that helps you put socks on. You just put your sock on this like plastic thing, drop that on the floor, and there's a bit of string, and you just pull it over your foot, and then your sock comes on. And that was just absolutely like a light bulb moment, like life-changing for me. Like I could have a slight bit of independence back. I didn't have to ask my sister to help me put my socks on, which seems so trivial, but it's really not. And it's those things that like kind of led me to want to do OT, is helping people to get their independence back, because I think it's such an important thing, and so it's so needed to help in terms of recovery as well from just for kind of anything. It's just so important. And yeah, so I wanted to do OT for a long time, but I never, as I said, I kind of never got round to it, but it was always in the back of my head. And I just remember thinking one day it's something I want to go into. But yeah, now I'm actually doing it, which is good. But I think ideally I do want to go into rheumatology. I think I'd be silly not to. But yeah, we'll see how the rest of my placements go. You never know, I might find something else that I might be more passionate about, yeah, but true. I very much doubt it.
I'm sure you'd be a big asset just with that lived experience, and as you know, that's something we're trying to in the community, just in general, trying to get more people into those positions, because we really need to integrate that and get that lived experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just if I was to see an OT that said to me, oh, I have arthritis too, and I had just that kind of like light bulb moment, I think, or that recognition that someone would understand what you've been through, I think is also like incredibly important. But yeah, and I just think OT is such an underrated profession as well. I really do. Like, I think OTs are incredible, which is why obviously I want to be an incredible OT.
It really is. And I know we've talked about this a bit on the channel in the past, but for the benefit of podcast listeners, I've shared my experiences on that, and I did not know that role even really existed. I just assumed it was sort of under the Occ Health kind of, my experiences through being referred at work for a workplace set and support. And it was only when I found out about pain management, which again got to my 30s before I realised it existed, and I was assigned a dedicated pain management OT. It was like, actually, that was probably the first person I'd met that cared about my quality of life with arthritis. So you see your consultant, that's all about joint inflammation and pain levels and, treatment management and not burning out a drug too quickly before you run out of options and this sort of thing. But it's by far the first person. I've had the odd physio, it's probably unfair, I've had the odd physio that's worried about if I can be independent and everything, but it's definitely the first person that cared about like a real holistic quality of life, whether that's me getting changed, bathing, getting to work with minimum impact, and that it just amazed me that I've had arthritis since I was 10. That it took 20 years for me to even come across that role.
Yeah,
we've got to change.
That's wild. Yeah, but that's why I love OT though. I think because it is that kind of holistic approach to care, and like what I try and remember as well. And obviously, I've got another year left before I'm qualified, but in the back of my head, I just have to constantly think it's all about the occupational therapy is all about the occupation, the doing, and like you're essentially helping someone to do what they want or need to do in life. And it's such a simple thing, and something like, as I said before, something as simple as being able to put my sock on, like, is so kind of transformative that it's just to be able to do that for someone, I think would be really incredible.
And I don't know about you, I just think as well, going back to that whole lived experience, I'm just a lot more likely to open up if somebody tells me that they get it, because I could list a million things that I haven't told other healthcare professionals because I just think they're not going to understand, when they're asking me about my pain and they're not understanding why actually the impact on my relationships is more important or the impact on my finances is more important. And, because it's fluid, isn't it? And I think our desired goals, outcomes change. Well, for me, it's on a almost like weekly, if not monthly basis, depending on what's going on in your life. So to have someone in front of you and they say, I've got lived experience, they don't even have to say, like, I had that or compare and contrast, because sometimes that can be intimidating for people. But just saying, I've got lived experience, that would just open up so many doors for me as an individual.
Definitely. And I think that having that experience and being able to offer that to potential patients and also to, parents and other children that I meet through volunteering and through anywhere in life, really, anyone that you come across, being able to just share those experiences is so important because it just shows that you're not alone, and it shows that it's just raising that awareness as well, because you never know who that person will then kind of meet and then find someone else was diagnosed with JA or has gone through that themselves, or it's like a knock-on effect, isn't it? So I think it's really important to just continue to raise that awareness and just to make sure that people know that arthritis isn't just for old people. Young people can get arthritis too. Such a simple thing.
I'm just intrigued because obviously you've been in a really sort of well place. I'm so used to having people on the other end of the spectrum, so I feel like I need to sort of ask a little bit more. It's like, so obviously you do great stuff around awareness. You've mentioned CCAA and charity stuff and that sort of thing. And is that something you've always done, like since childhood, or if not, was there like because normally people start, like my advocacy journey started with a big event and I didn't want somebody else to go through that, but presuming yours has been controlled, is that just something you've always felt a sort of desire to do?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think that's always kind of been ingrained in me, just volunteering in charity work and that kind of raising awareness has always been something I've wanted to do. And I think that's just, again, that's come from my parents, because my parents, when we were younger, when me and my sister were younger, they ran another charity, and then we kind of like moved along to CCAA and started volunteering with CCAA. And so that kind of charity background has always been there. It's been there throughout my life. So yeah, I think it's just so ingrained in me to try and raise awareness. And I think I just, as well as when I was younger, I would just get annoyed that people would think arthritis is for old people because I'd be like, well, it obviously isn't, because I'm a child and I have arthritis. Um, so it's just kind of drilling that in. And I think as I've got older, obviously, it's I think it's a little bit harder now because I haven't been on medication for a long time and I haven't had a flare. I do kind of feel like I am out of it a little bit and I'm not really fully kind of in the arthritis circles, I guess, and especially because I'm not under a rheumatologist. So I think that can be quite difficult because it's that, like, I've still got JIA that doesn't go away. You said that before as well, I think previously, like JIA just doesn't go away. You've always got it. But because I don't really have flares and I don't have any issues day to day, it kind of feels a bit weird sometimes saying that I do have arthritis, because people would be like, well, but you're not suffering, or you're not having flares, or you seem to be fine. And I think that's quite difficult. But I think that's what comes as well with it being an invisible illness, that not every 2 days are the same. Even when I was on medication, when I was younger, I think there would be days where one day I'd be fine. And then the next day, like, I could barely walk, or I'd really struggle kind of at school in PE and things like that. So I think that's like, yeah, that's quite a big thing to kind of get your head around as well, if that makes sense.
And it makes perfect sense. You're doing my job for me because you've segued perfectly into the next section about the whole
Look what
feeling
I
like a
do.
fraud and invisible illness. Because
Yeah.
I had that exact same experience. Like I say, my first big, I was kind of like the kid with arthritis in a wheelchair, and that was kind of, looking back probably wrongly, that was kind of just my thing. And high school was horrendous, and then all of a sudden I got to 18 and everything went away, and I felt like a complete fraud because I'm taking all these drugs and I'd got all this support. And back at the time, I had it was an orange badge, yeah, and that shows you my age, blue badge, and then all of a sudden, it's not there, and that was the first time I'd really encountered that. So it's interesting to hear you say it as well, and it definitely seems to be more of a JIA thing, like without being too generalising. I think because we can, the condition, we get it a lot earlier, and you can get these big breaks and everything. And I think just socially, it's a lot harder, high school and everything else. It's just really interesting. And I don't know about you. It just doesn't feel like something that's talked anywhere near. We're tackling lots of new issues now that should have been tackled years ago, like mental health and paediatric dedicated rheumatology support and this sort of thing. But nobody's really touching upon that delicate subject of how you genuinely feel as a patient if you're young
Yeah,
in particular, and it completely goes away.
absolutely. And I think there's that. I think you mentioned it back when you did the JAR live stream as well, and that transition point as well, and having that kind of support as an adult with JIA, because I think that there's definitely, like, it seems to be a lack of that as well. But I definitely think that is what comes with an invisible illness, I think, isn't it? Like, people can question, oh, well, you don't look ill, or you don't seem ill. So then you feel like, oh, wow, I feel a bit bad then now. And I think I went through this as well when I was applying for disabled student allowance for my occupational therapy degree.
Yeah.
So when I did my undergrad, I was 18, and I didn't apply for any help. I didn't apply for disabled student allowance. I just didn't. I think I was in that stage, like, as I said before, I just couldn't be bothered, and I just didn't think I needed it. And now I'm at that point where I'm like, well, no, actually, I am entitled to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might not necessarily have as many struggles, but if I'm entitled to it and there is potential for me to struggle, then why shouldn't I, like, apply for this and get it? And, luckily, I did get it approved, and I managed to get quite a lot of equipment to help me if I'm, doing assignments and things like that. And I also am more kind of, I will always let people know that I've got it. So whenever I've kind of started a new job, a new role, started my degree, start on my placements that I do, I always tell whoever I need to that I've got arthritis, just in case. You never know, something might happen. And most of the time, nothing ever does happen. But I think it's always, and again, the back of my head really is just, I'm kind of telling them as well, just to raise awareness still and have that, because then they might have another staff member that comes along who does have it a bit more severe, and they've already may have put things in place to help tackle that in a job. So yeah.
And there is that element as well, isn't there, that you just, when it does go away, you don't want to think about it too much. You just want to get on, and I've fell into that trap, and it's the argument I keep having with pharmaceutical companies over tracking apps, in that sometimes when I'm in remission, I don't want to keep recording symptoms because it's kind of a reminder that they're still there. But my experience at university was almost the opposite, because I was in a wheelchair like right up to before I went to uni, got all of this kit thrown at me, a bigger room, ground floor and all that, and then I literally a couple of months in was able to play sport, and I used to play hockey as well, play hockey again, and then I was like, and that made me feel massively like a fraud, So so there is that. I think whichever anyone listening to this on either side, it doesn't matter. It can still have that same effect, and even now as an adult who talks and raises awareness about this stuff all the while, I'm still falling foul of it, because this weekend I'm going to a festival, and I applied for disabled parking. And I felt the whole time I've got like anxiety sweat. I'm like over explaining that I'm not going to need it. You're going to see me. I'm going to be turning up and walking absolutely fine. But by the end of the day, my wife's going to be dragging me back to the car, and just in case I'm having a bad day. And I read it back, and I got it and everything. But I read it back, and I was just like, why didn't I just say, hello, I'm Joel Nelson. I've got arthritis. I need accessible parking. And I guess it's our experiences and having it from a young age, and because it comes and goes, I don't really know the answer, but it's crazy how many of us do that.
And I think I guess you're constantly having to justify it when you were ill, so then I think maybe that's so ingrained in us that every time you do kind of have to ask for a bit of help, then it's, I don't know, you just have to kind of justify it, and it's like, well, I need help because this, and this, when actually you could just say, I need help.
Yeah.
And make it a lot easier. Because I think when I was younger, as I said, I think I probably was a bit too determined, because there were times when I probably didn't ask for help when I should have. And I was a bit more like perhaps secretive, or didn't really want people to know that I was struggling. And I would just kind of force myself to get on with it. And I think that I guess that's just kind of a part of it, isn't it? You just have to push through, but then also there is nothing wrong with asking for help. And I think, I don't know if that comes with age, or just there's just more like awareness now, or I don't know what that is, but I think asking for help is just, you shouldn't be embarrassed about that, or you shouldn't be concerned about that. And I talk about my arthritis all the time now, but then there is that feeling of me thinking, oh, but I'm not under a rheumatologist, and I'm not on medication, so actually, can I even say I've got arthritis? But like, obviously I do. So it's treading a bit of a fine line, isn't it? I think.
And you need to give yourself credit for that, and don't ever. And like I say, I do it all the while, and I'm sitting here in pain most days, and I still feel like a fraud sometimes. and I think it's just human nature. People compare, and social media isn't great for that sort of thing. But you certainly put me to shame with your awareness raise, I think, because for me it took this big life event to stop hiding everything, and the fact that you've just been doing it naturally the whole time, whether you've got symptoms or not, I think says a lot about you.
Yeah, I do try. I try. I just like to spread the word, because as I said, you never know who someone's going to meet down the line, and then they can just be like, oh yeah, well, I met someone who had arthritis and they were young, and it's just knock on effect.
That's the end goal, isn't it? To stop getting that default line of, oh yeah, my granddad's got that from being a plumber, or whatever, that wear
all that wear and tear stuff. Oh god,
keeps coming up. But yeah, for me, it's just, I think it's refreshing and hopefully gives hope to other people as well to hear somebody who's gone through this sort of JIA journey and had that promised land of remission, because we were all told it. I was told exactly the same thing. You could get to 16 and it's just, but they would still use terms like grown out of, which is a silly thing to say because you're not growing out of it. It's just, I think, take away the treatment you would have had and everything to get that remission and get you to that place. I don't think you're just naturally grown out of it, but unfortunately that is the language that is used. It's just nice to hear somebody that's had that journey, but also more importantly, I think for you as an individual, still uses those experiences, no matter how far in the past they are, to do some good with them. So thank you on behalf of the community for that.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. No, I think you've got to be able to just do that and raise awareness, because it just keeps it going. And I just don't, I wouldn't want anyone to like not to think that they're alone going through it. I would always like to think that somewhere they could find someone who has gone through it, or find someone. So even doing your Twitch channel, I think is an incredible thing, because you're reaching an audience that perhaps might not look on any other kind of social medias. So I think it's great.
Yeah, thank you. And that is the goal. Obviously, it's like I know that without generalising too much, that certain people are going to listen to podcasts. Like myself, as a dog walker, I was always listening to podcasts, and then there's other people that are not going to touch podcasts. So the idea is that hopefully we can reach enough people. And I think it's why it's important that we talk about the wins, the bad days, but also the bits where we're human. So whether that's you not chasing an appointment, me stopped taking my meds when I went into remission, and I think it's important that we talk about being human as well, because that happens, and it will inevitably have an impact on any long-term health condition, won't it?
Yeah, definitely. There was times when I was younger that I thought I knew better than everyone. Like, and you do, to the point where I actually I can't actually remember how old I am, but this is a story that probably gets told on every CCAA weekend. So a lot of parents probably have heard this, but I just kind of stopped taking my medication myself instead of actually taking my medication. So my parents would line up my methotrexate tablets on the fireplace with a biscuit on the end and my cup of squash to take them. And I just started flicking them off the side, just flicking them off the fireplace. And then, I wasn't taking my tablets. So a couple of weeks later, I was just having like this massive flare. And my parents were like, well, why? Don't understand. She's on her medication. What's going on? And sorry to like name and shame my parents, but it does shows how much they cleaned, because they pulled back the fireplace to like hoover, and then they found all these tablets that I just didn't take, because I was so sick of taking my medication, because anyone who's taken methotrexate knows how awful it can be. And then all of a sudden they were like, oh, well, that makes sense. That's why you're having this massive flare. And obviously my flare, I was in pain, I was restricted, I couldn't do things. And it took that to happen for me to think, oh, okay, well, actually, the side effects of the medication isn't as bad as actually having this awful flare. And my parents actually made me write a letter to my doctor to apologise. So yeah, I felt really bad.
But we've all done it, and I always use this opportunity, because methotrexate gets a massively bad rap because everybody focuses on the side effects, and they are, when you struggle with it. I had some horrific ones at the end, which meant I could no longer use it. And even when I was on it from sort of 14 to probably my late 20s, and there'd be days where you're just throwing up and you think, why am I taking this? But it worked. When it works brilliantly. And I was the same. I stopped taking mine when I went on to university because it didn't mix with alcohol. And I got to university, I went into remission, I'd be able to play hockey and rugby and things like that again. And the last thing I wanted to do is be taking this sort of chemo-based drug that made me throw up. So
yeah, exactly.
And you find out pretty quickly that they work when they work. So,
100%. Yeah, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's why I take that medication, because it actually stops me having a flare up.
Yeah. So yeah, if you are listening to this, they are definitely an option. I think a lot of people, I think because of all the press and everything, try to jump to biologics and get frustrated not knowing there's certain pathways you have to go through. But yeah, open mind. But they do they're not for everyone, but they do work.
Yeah, I mean that was all that was available as well when I
Yes, yeah,
was first diagnosed. It was literally methotrexate or more. That's it really.
yeah.
So and luckily for me it did work, but I think it is incredible how far we've come since, the last 20, 30 years, the amount of different options and medications there are, and also how young kids are getting diagnosed now as well.
Yes, yeah.
Like it's actually incredible. Kids get diagnosed at, a year, 18 months. Whereas I was 4, you were 10. It's quite a big difference, isn't it? So.
And you only have to look at, some of the people I work with in various organisations that are maybe sort of 10 years ahead of me on that journey. We all talk to each other and say, you know what, we probably had it a lot earlier, but you just, growing pains or a doctor dismisses it or whatever. So it shows you how far we've come on that. I think like we've already talked about on here, areas things like OT and more sort of like multidisciplinary mental health support, that sort of thing. I think there's still lots of work to be done there, but the good thing is now the actual paediatric side of it is definitely it's unrecognisable to what my experience was.
Yeah, it's only gonna just continue to improve, and the options as well. So it really is incredible to see. And I think even seeing kids, one of the weekends when I went to the CCAA weekend when I was a child, there was quite a few kids there in wheelchairs and crutches. Whereas now, you can't really spot which kids got arthritis. I mean, on the weekends, we make them all do rock climbing and zip lining and all this kind of stuff, which is, maybe not great for arthritic kids, but, we make them do it anyway. But it's just incredible to see that it's not obvious, and it just goes to show how far it's come, and it can only get better.
Yeah, and the bit for people to remember, the condition hasn't changed. It's the treatment and the management of it, because I think sometimes people forget that. And, I was really lucky. I had a doctor that told me to do as much as I could do, as long as I could do it. And so mine was always, as soon as I walked in the door, I used to play hockey, and it used to wind the hell up at me when I was really bad, because I think, of course I'm not. You have to bend over and it wrecks your knees and everything. But what I would say is, comparing to my mates who played just as many seasons as me, their knees are just as wrecked from running on Astro as mine are with arthritis. Yeah. So that I think it is my advice to anyone now is do as much as you can. Obviously you've got to do the whole pacing thing and allow for recovery and everything else, but yeah, you never know when that next bump in the road is coming, and you definitely, as somebody who's lost a lot of movement the last 2 years, it's a lot harder to get it back.
That's it. And like you said about pacing as well, even now I know that if I was to go on a long walk with a friend, I know that I'd probably struggle in the evening, or I know my ankles would probably be clicking away as they do. And so I just, kind of wouldn't fill my day with something too kind of heavy, or just, be aware of. But I think, again, that kind of comes with time, whereas when I was a lot younger, I just wanted to do everything and get everything done. But I think as well, it is important to just not, as I know it's easier said than done, but you can't let it stop you from doing things you want to do. Like if you want to do it, obviously there's certain restrictions, but I think I've done so much in my life so far. I've been to Australia, I've been to New Zealand, I traveled for quite a few years on my own. I went on my own. I've done skydives, I've done zip lining, all this kind of stuff. And yes, that is quite a lot for me to do, but I know, as you said, it's that pacing thing, and it's just knowing that some days then you'd have to take it a bit slower, or I don't know. I do think you've got to just kind of do what you can.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah. And I'm saying, like I say, next week I'm going to a festival, and I know the Monday nobody's going to see me because I'm going to be stuck in bed, and it's going to be agony. But it's weighing it up. It's knowing that clearing the space afterwards to recover, and as long as you're not living your life like that every week, a couple of times is not going to hurt. And also sometimes for anyone that's gone through the whole steroid depot thing where they then tell you to do as much as possible, sometimes it is pushing that bar back a little bit more, so that when you then go through that painful recovery, you actually find the next time it's a bit like, you know, people who go to the gym for the first time and they're in agony because they've got muscles they didn't know they had. It can be like that. So as long as you're not pushing it to breaking point, you can try and nudge those limits, but you need to be sensible about it.
That's exactly kind of what I was trying to say, just worded better. Thanks, Joel. Just don't go too crazy, but you know, do the things, you know.
And I think as we talk a lot on this channel and podcast and everything about the fluidity of it and how it makes you feel like fraud, but I think one of the positives is you never know when that next sort of like break in the clouds is coming, you know. So even myself, who's had a really rough 2 or 3 years, in a blip at the minute, I still hold on to that. Well, when I was in a wheelchair at 13, I didn't think I was ever going to be able to play sport, and I'd done it for 10 years. So I'd say, anyone out there, it's minimising the damage as well, because, like I say, you lose that mobility. It's minimising the damage. Make sure you stand on top of the active disease bit, but providing you don't leave too many scars after a flare, then there's nothing to say you can't get it back, is there?
That's it. You've just got to look after yourself. That's the number one priority, isn't it? You've got to do what's right for you. And that's it, isn't it, really? Simple as, just look after yourself. If it was that easy, you know, we'd all be fine, but you know.
And that's why it's also good to sort of take what you need from people that are raising awareness or posting things, because if someone's having a good day, it doesn't invalidate your bad day or make you a failure. And it's that same sort of thing. It's like, it's a very personalised thing, and our days will never align. So, because I can do something on one day and you can't, that doesn't mean that you're failing at managing your condition as well. And that's what I constantly try to remind people, because I think a lot of comparing and contrasting does go on in today's world, and that is, I suppose, one of the pitfalls you have to be aware of with us, right? People like yourselves raising awareness, because I've had the comments where, well, I'd love to be able to travel and go to a conference, or I'd love to be able to have my own Twitch, but do you know what I mean? There's a lot of work to get to that point and get that level of energy and equipment to support your posture or whatever that might be. So I think that's why what we're doing and being open and honest and sharing the good and the bad is valuable.
Yeah, that's it. I think if people can take away obviously what they want from certain social media posts or whatever, and but I think, as you said, it's so important to be honest and open, because it's not all sunshine and rainbows, but it's not always like hard either, you know, like there are times where it is okay. So I think it's showing that balance and showing that difference. It just makes it more not normal. Well, I guess it's just more accepting, isn't it? It's just, that's life. That's what everyone goes through. Everyone goes through ups and downs. So
and as you've shown, you know, being by far the most positive story I've had on the podcast so far. So I'm just now that's just gonna be a thing. Remember, there's always an Amy.
There's always me.
You can have long remission. We've absolutely flown for an hour there.
Haven't we?
I'm conscious of your time, so I'm gonna probably let you go at this point. Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to say, or if you want to plug anything where people can find you or the organisations you work with?
Yeah, sure. You can find me at amyface921 on Twitter, where I kind of post a lot of arthritis-y or OT stuff. And if you want to check out CCAA as well, that's Children's Chronic Arthritis Association, but CCAA, just Google that, and that's the charity I volunteer for. So check them out.
And for anyone listening to this back on the podcast, I'll put all of those links in the show notes, so you'll have them. Just look on the description part of whichever platform you're listening to it on, and they'll be there. Thank you so much, Amy. I don't know if you're still hanging around with us afterwards. I wouldn't blame you if you need a break from us after the interview. But if anyone's got any questions that are watching this live on Twitch, feel free to put them in chat, and then maybe we can pick them up in chat. As always, guys, I'll run a quick ad break, and it will work this time, I promise, to let Amy go. Amy, on behalf of the community, thank you for everything you do for this channel and over on Discord. And for anyone that isn't on Discord, the link's there in chat. And just thank you for giving up your time, and also at very short notice to to do this with us. That's been really useful.
Honestly, you are more than welcome. So thank you so much for having me, Joel. You're doing a good thing with this. So yeah, well done. Keep it going.
Cheers. Thank you. Right, I'm going to let you go, but I might see you in chat shortly then.
Take care.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.